Something is off in Cleveland. And I don't mean the record. I don't mean the depth chart. I don't mean the offensive scheme or the coaching staff or any of the things that usually get dissected and debated at this time of year. I mean something else. Something quieter. Something that's happening in the background, behind closed doors, behind carefully worded press releases, behind a wall of controlled access that the Cleveland Browns organization has built around one specific person. And that person is Shedeur Sanders. Before we get into the details, before we start pulling this thing apart, I want you to just sit with the basic fact for a second. Reporters showed up. Cameras were ready. Microphones were out. And Shedeur Sanders was nowhere near them. Not because he was hurt. Not because he was in trouble. He was just unavailable. Off limits. Not for you. Not for anyone outside that building. And the team's explanation? Vague. Carefully managed. Saying just enough to technically answer the question, and absolutely nothing more. That's not an accident. That is a strategy. And today we are going to talk about what that strategy is really about, and why it matters a lot more than it might seem on the surface. I want you to think about who Shedeur Sanders actually is. Not just as a football player, but as a public figure. As a person who grew up in front of cameras, in front of attention, in front of pressure that most young men never face in a lifetime. His father is Dillon Sanders. Prime time. One of the most magnetic, most confident, most media-savvy personalities in the history of American sports. Shedeur was raised in that world. He learned to walk in that world. He watched his father own every room he ever walked into, and then he went out and started owning rooms himself. He played at Colorado, not exactly a program known for producing first-round quarterbacks, and he made people pay attention anyway. He put up numbers. He gave interviews. He handled the spotlight like someone who had been preparing for it his whole life. Because he had. And then the draft happened. And the noise around Shedeur Sanders got loud. Really loud. There were questions about his game, legitimate football questions, but also questions about his attitude, his confidence, whether his father's shadow was helping him or hurting him. He heard all of it. He absorbed all of it. And he kept going. He kept showing up. He kept talking. So here is what I need you to understand. The Shedeur Sanders who arrived at Cleveland Browns minicamp is not a kid who is afraid of a microphone. He is not someone who needs to be protected from attention. He has been in the spotlight since he was a teenager. He is comfortable there, which is exactly why the decision to hide him doesn't make sense. Unless there is something else going on. Let's talk about where Shedeur Sanders is actually landing. Because this isn't just any NFL franchise. This is the Cleveland Browns in 2025. And if you know anything about what this organization has been through over the last 3 years, you know that the word franchise quarterback carries a very specific, very painful weight in that building right now. Deshaun Watson. That's where we have to start. And look, I'm not here to relitigate everything that happened with Deshaun Watson. That story has been told. What I want to talk about is what it left behind. Because when the Browns gave Watson that fully guaranteed contract, $230 million, they weren't just signing a quarterback. They were making a bet. They were saying, this is our guy, this is our future, this is the identity of this franchise going forward. And then that bet collapsed. Slowly, painfully, publicly. An injury that wouldn't heal. A return that never quite arrived. A fan base that went from cautiously hopeful to visibly exhausted. And an organization that had to stand in front of the cameras and explain again and again why the quarterback they had staked everything on wasn't on the field. That experience changes an organization. It makes people careful in ways they weren't careful before. It makes front offices think twice about every word, every image, every narrative that goes out the door with their name on it. And now, right now, those same people are rebuilding. They are trying to restore something that takes years to earn and can disappear overnight. And the tool they're using to do it is a rookie quarterback with one of the most recognizable last names in football. The pressure in that situation is enormous. And the Cleveland Browns know it. Which might explain why they're holding on so tight. Now, here is where it gets complicated. Because not everyone sees this the same way. And I think it's important that we actually sit with both sides before we make up our minds. There is a reasonable argument that what the Browns are doing is smart. That rookie quarterbacks, especially high-profile ones, need time to settle into a new system before they're performing for cameras. That the relationship between a young quarterback and his teammates, his offensive line, his coaches, that relationship needs to be built in private before it's tested in public. Some of the best quarterback developments in recent NFL history happened quietly, away from the noise, with organizations that intentionally created space for growth before they created space for attention. And if you believe that framework, then what Cleveland is doing makes a kind of sense. They're protecting an investment. They're buying time. They're doing what careful, responsible organizations do with high-value assets. But then, you have to explain Dillon Gabriel. Because Dillon Gabriel is also a quarterback in that building. Also learning a new system. Also a young player finding his footing in a professional environment for the first time. And yet somehow, Dillon Gabriel is accessible. Dillon Gabriel is talking to reporters. Dillon Gabriel is available in ways that Shedeur Sanders is not. And the moment you notice that asymmetry, though we're protecting our quarterbacks, argument starts to fall apart. Because if this was really just a policy, a blanket organizational approach to managing young quarterbacks, it would apply to everyone equally. It wouldn't have exceptions. It wouldn't have a gap. But there is a gap. There is a very clear, very visible, very intentional gap between who the Browns are making available and who they are not. And when the exception is always the same person, that's not a policy anymore. That is a decision. And decisions have reasons. I want to stop for a second and talk about Shedeur Sanders as a human being. Because I think sometimes in these conversations we forget that there is a real person inside all of this. A young man in his early 20s who just took one of the biggest steps of his life. Think about what the draft process actually feels like. You go through interviews where people question your character. You sit in rooms while strangers debate whether you are good enough, whether your success was real, whether your confidence is an asset or a liability. You listen to people say your father is the reason you're here, as if the work you put in doesn't count, as if the game film doesn't exist, as if everything you built is borrowed. You go through all of that, and then you get drafted. And for a moment, just a moment, there is relief. There is the feeling that you made it, that you proved something, and then you walk into your new building. And instead of being put front and center, instead of being introduced to the world with the full backing of the organization behind you, you are pulled back. You are made invisible. You are kept out of reach of the people who want to cover your story, tell your story, share your story with the fans who are going to be cheering for you every Sunday. What does that do to someone? What does it do to a young quarterback to look around and realize that another quarterback in his building is being treated differently? That the access isn't equal? That the message being sent to the outside world, whether intentionally or not, is that he is the one who needs to be controlled? There is a very thin line between protection and restriction, between shielding someone and silencing them. And from the outside, from where we are sitting right now, it is very, very hard to tell which side of that line the Cleveland Browns are standing on. Meanwhile, the world is watching, and the world does not wait. Cleveland Browns fans have lived through more than most fan bases are ever asked to endure. They have watched more false dawns than they can count. More quarterbacks who were supposed to be the answer. More draft picks who were supposed to change everything. More seasons that started with hope and ended with disappointment. They have earned the right to be skeptical. They have earned the right to ask hard questions. And right now those fans are going online. They are going to every platform where NFL conversation happens. They are talking to each other. They are speculating. They are trying to fill in the blanks that the organization is refusing to fill in for them. And here is the thing about speculation. It almost always goes to the darkest place first. When you don't give people the real story, they write their own. And the story they write is usually worse than the truth. The rumor is always bigger than the reality. The silence always sounds like guilt. The media isn't going to let this go. That's not how the media works. The more tightly an organization grips the narrative, the more the narrative fights back. Every reporter who gets turned away from Shedeur Sanders is a reporter who has a new question to ask. Every press conference where the answer is vague is a press conference that generates more questions than it answers. The Browns think they are controlling the story. But what they are actually doing, what they may not fully realize they are doing, is making the story bigger. Because silence doesn't kill a story. Silence feeds it. So let's talk about what is actually at stake here. Because this isn't just about media access. This isn't just about press conferences and camera time. This is about the future of a franchise. And more than that, the future of a young man's career at its most critical moment. If Shedeur Sanders develops into the quarterback Cleveland needs, if he takes the reins, earns the locker room, wins games, gives that fan base something to believe in again, then none of this matters. The restricted access becomes a footnote. The drama of these early months becomes a prequel to a great story. The front office gets credit for being patient, for managing the process, for protecting their investment until it was ready. But if it goes the other way, If the pressure becomes too much, if the weight of the expectations and the shadow of Deshaun Watson's contract and the unequal treatment of quarterbacks in the building starts to crack something, then every single decision the Cleveland Browns made this offseason gets examined. Every choice gets questioned. And the first question, the very first question, won't be about the offensive line. It won't be about the play calling. It won't be about the receivers or the scheme or the schedule. The first question will be, what did you know about Shedeur Sanders that you were not willing to show us? What was behind the curtain? What were you afraid of? Why, when you had a chance to introduce the face of your franchise to the world, did you choose to hide him instead? And that question, once it's in the air, once people start asking it publicly, loudly, repeatedly, is almost impossible to answer without making everything worse. Because there is no good answer. If you say you were protecting him, the follow-up is, from what? If you say you were managing the process, the follow-up is, why did you manage it differently for someone else? There is no version of that press conference that ends well. The only version that saves them is the one where Shedeur Sanders takes the field and plays well enough that nobody cares anymore. And that version depends entirely on a young man who, right now, is being kept out of sight. So here is where we land. The Cleveland Browns have something rare right now. They have a quarterback with a name, with a pedigree, with a story that people want to follow. They have a chance, a genuine, fragile, maybe once-in-a-decade chance, to rebuild the relationship between this franchise and its fan base. To turn the page on everything that went wrong with Deshaun Watson. To give people a new reason to show up, tune in, believe again. And instead of throwing those doors wide open, instead of saying here, this is our guy, this is our future, come see what we're building, they have closed the curtains. They have drawn the blinds. They have put Shedeur Sanders behind glass and told the rest of us to wait. And maybe that's the right call. Maybe there's wisdom in what they're doing that we can't fully see from the outside. Maybe in 6 months we'll look back at this moment and say, that organization knew exactly what it was doing. They protected him until he was ready. And then they let him fly. Or maybe not. Maybe the curtain stays closed a little too long. Maybe the story that fills the silence is harder to shake than anyone planned. Maybe the gap between Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel grows into something that can't be explained away. Maybe, just maybe, what we're watching right now is an organization that doesn't quite know what it has, and is not yet ready to find out. Either way, football has a way of telling the truth. The game doesn't care about press strategies. The field doesn't care about controlled narratives. At some point very soon, Shedeur Sanders is going to walk out in front of the whole world, whether the Cleveland Browns want him to or not. And in that moment, everything they've been hiding, everything they've been managing, protecting, controlling, is going to be right there for everyone to see. The question isn't whether that moment is coming. The question is, what are we going to find out when it does? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you think something bigger is going on in Cleveland than what the front office is letting on, smash that like button, because this story is just getting started. I'll see you in the next one.